All right, welcome back to Irela's Aquarium Corner. Wow, 20 minutes of talking about hardware, and I realized I kind of didn't actually talk about all the hardware I think you need to know about. So let's talk about three different categories. The absolute must-haves. If you have an aquarium, you need these. The I think you should haves, but I guess they're not necessary. And the situationally useful. In the must-haves, I think a net is pretty obvious. You're going to want to move a fish, and you're not catching it by hand. So move on. The next absolute must-have, a water test kit. These measure primarily pH, ammonia, nitrite. You get many other test kits, potassium, phosphorus. This is the most important. A quick little thing about pH, though. You'll read a lot about fish, this fish requiring 7.0, this fish requiring 6.0, the same with the plants. And you might think that you need to chase pH. In fact, they'll probably tell you if you read like some review about a fish, it's like, oh, this fish does best in 7.0 pH. Well, your tap water is like 6.8. Oh, you got to fix that. No, you don't. You even extreme pHs. My tanks are a pH of 8.4. And I think nearly every fish I have, if you read on the label, they're going to say, oh, it wants a pH of 7. They're fine. It's really important. Don't try to chase pH. You can with some, it's an advanced user kind of thing, I think. I don't chase pH. There's several methods of it that are safe, and one method I'm going to tell you right now, do not do. Do not but use chemical pH adjusters. Just don't. They are harmful and dangerous, and wow, I need to clean that glass. It's really showing up on the camera. Chemical pH adjusters will kill your fish. You'd think that if a fish wants 7.0, oh, it's not going to adapt to 8.4. It really does. But the trick is you only want them to go through that adaptation once in their life. A chemical pH adjuster, every time you change the water, you're going to have to readjust. You're going to have to put the chemical back in. And it's like, yeah, you change the water, pH drop, raises back up to 8.4, put the chemical back in, drops back down to 7. That's what, three adjustments in a day. They'll die. You'll kill all of your fish if you do that. So accept whatever your pH is. Just accept it as what it is. Don't chase it, and just get some fish. I'd say the only thing is if your water's like mine, really high in the 8, you maybe don't want a fish that they say comes from a natural lake of a 6. Maybe just accept that you're not going to be raising that particular fish. So that's just my little aside to pH. Just accept what you got. Don't chase it. The other things, really important stuff for the water test kit: ammonia, nitrite. A quick little lesson on the nitrogen cycle in your tanks. The fish produce ammonia. Bacteria breaks it down into nitrite. Then other bacteria breaks it down again into nitrate. Nitrate is toxic long term. That's why we do water changes. Except plants change everything. The plants eat the ammonia at step 1. And maybe a little bit of ammonia gets converted into nitrite. But then the plants eat the nitrite. And if you have enough plants and more plants than you have fish, then you won't need to do water changes. I don't have that balance in all my tanks. In the big tank, I never need to do water changes. I do a nitrate test regularly. There's no nitrates in this water. There's none, to the point where I've contemplated giving it fertilizer in the past. I think you can see these plants and realize, yeah, I probably don't need to fertilize this tank. But this tank does not require water changes, at least as far as nitrates are concerned. The other 2 tanks do. This tank just has more fish in it relative to gallons of water and relative to plants. That does, wow, sorry about reflections. And this tank too also does need water changes. Not as much as the 20 gallon, but it does. But I'm not going to go deeply into the nitrogen cycle in your tanks. Learn about that on your own. This is just hardware, but I just thought it was important. If I'm going to talk about a test kit, I should at least test that. And the third absolutely crucial thing, it's sad, but medicine. Your fish are going to get sick. You're going to want to try and cure them. You don't want to just replace them as soon as they get sick. I like three things. API General Cure, it's for parasites. Maricin for bacterial infections. And then ICX, it's also for bacterial infections, but they can be used together. I'm not good at diagnosing my fish, so I will actually just put them, I'll take whatever sick fish I have, and I'll put them in my little 5-gallon quarantine tank. And I guess I would say this is the other thing that I would rate as crucially important is a quarantine tank. You get new fish, quarantine them. A fish gets sick, quarantine them, and then treat them with medicine. And it's also, to me, it's important for your quarantine tank to be smaller than your other tanks, in that all of this stuff is like, oh yeah, X amount of teaspoons per 10 gallons. Well, that's a 5-gallon tank. I don't need to put very much. I only have to do 1/8 of the amount of medicine in that little tank than if I were trying to medicate my giant 40-gallon tank, right? So those would be the most important. I know it kind of sucks to have to start up a whole new tank that, for most purposes, is kind of just going to sit empty for most of its life. What I mean is sit empty in that you're not going to have show fish in it. You don't want it to be empty. You want it to have water in it. You want to have a sponge filter in it or some form of biology in it so that you can take a fish out of one of your other tanks and just dump them in your quarantine tank. They'll be fine. You don't want them to go through shock of having to start up a new tank. So those are what I consider to be the absolute necessities for anyone. Nets, test kit, medicine, quarantine tank. Onto I think you should have these, but I suppose they're not necessary. First off, the big one in the middle. I talked some real shit about surface skimmers in my hardware video, and I never really told you about the options. And to me, this was the option I went with. It's just a kind of a homemade, just a piece of fabric in here, filter floss, I mean, on just a piece of bottle that I think it's actually 2 pieces of bottle. I hot melted them together, drilled a hole in it, and stuck it on a power head. You can stick that up against the surface of the water to skim the surface. You can have it down at the bottom to suck up any mud. Do any amount of work in the tank. Trim some plants so you have leaves floating around. Put this in there. It doesn't stay in the tank, not for me. I only leave it in the tank for an afternoon, overnight maybe, after I've done some work to murk up my water. But that's my solution for the skimmer, and it's 100% safe. It's like stuff will accumulate on here, then you just peel it off, and if a baby fish gets in there, no, it doesn't have enough suction to harm them. So that's my solution to the skimmer. The other stuff, let's see, here we go. If you have plants, you can plant them by hand, but also just get some planting scissors. And the same with planting tweezers. Man, I cannot talk. And if you want to trim those plants, some scissors might be good. These are, long-handled with this curved blade. They're fine. I think I would prefer it if the blade was just at an angle and not curved, but it's fine. It's fine. And as for cleaning up, glass scrapers, magnetic cleaner. I don't really use the magnetic cleaner anymore. I rely almost entirely on the glass scrapers. I am just incapable of talking. This scraper originally came with a razor blade. I didn't like it for 2 reasons. It was a danger to me. It was a danger to my fish. And it was just not very well built. It was not flat. The razor blades were so paper thin that they would flex. And if this thing wasn't perfectly flat, which it wasn't, it had a nasty burr on the bottom, which was hilarious, then it would potentially scrape the glass. And it's just, there's no point. I got these plastic razor blades that'll just fit in any old scraper. I think I had to drill a couple of holes in the razor blades to get them to fit on this thing. This is my solution for algae on the glass. I used to use the magnetic one. It's fine. But in the end, I think the scraper is just better. So I think these are things you need. You don't need these fancy versions. You really could just use a old credit card to scrape. You don't need a magnetic scraper. You could just use an old sponge that you've made very, very sure that you have washed all of the soap out, but you could just use an old sponge. That'd be fine. And you don't need fancy tweezers. You could just use whatever. Or just your hands for planting fish. Planting fish? Planting plants. Yes, I plant fish and I grow plants. Oh my god. And the situationally useful ones. Fertilizers. And snail catcher? Actually, let's do the snail catcher first. I like this thing. If there's snails on the glass, and there are always snails on the glass in my aquarium, just go in here and scoop up the snails. Now, I don't hate snails. I dislike them, but I don't hate them. And I certainly don't dislike them enough that I would go through the effort of trying to get rid of them. Getting rid of snails on the scale that I have in these tanks would require some major chemical warfare. And I'm not willing to do that. So if I have a big outbreak of snails on the glass, I just use this, scoop them up. If I have a bunch of them, I can just throw a piece of carrot in there and they'll cover the carrot, and then I'll just net the carrot out with all the snails on it and throw those out. So that's fine. That's just my methods. And then fertilizers and also hydrogen peroxide. So I really only used fertilizer for a very short period of time. This was easy iron. Supposedly it'd make my plants redder. I used it for 6 months and I honestly didn't notice a difference. So I barely use it. You can see with all the dust on it, I don't use liquid fertilizers anymore. I used to, and I just noticed nothing. So the other ones here, these other fertilizers aren't actually for fertilizing. These are for algae control. This Flourish XL and CO2 booster, they're called liquid carbon. And I just use a large syringe like this, suck up some of the liquid carbon, and then douse the algae directly. So if I have algae growing on this plant, I can just squirt a little bit of liquid carbon directly into the algae, and it kind of causes the algae to break down. And the similar thing to that is hydrogen peroxide. Basically just water with extra hydrogen in it. It also breaks down algae, and you can just put it directly into your tank, and it's not going to harm your animals. Both of these, be sparingly with them. This thing says, only 1 milliliter. That's one of these little pips per 10 gallons. And if you're going to do them regularly, if you're actually going to use this stuff as a fertilizer, follow that instructions. If you're adding it to the water every week. For my purposes of just killing algae, I'll just fill this thing up with 10 times the amount that they recommend, but I'm only doing one big dose. And I'll just kind of nuke all the spot algae I see. For instance, up here in the 20 gallon, you can see that mossy algae growing on that filter there. I could just fill it up with that Flourish XL and just dose it, and nobody's really going to care. The fish aren't going to freak out. The other plants, it's a fertilizer. It's a fertilizer, so the plants are not going to be upset by it. But by spraying it directly on the algae does not like it. So those are my recommendations for other... Oh, wait. There's one more. Okay, pause. And resume. A thermometer. Yeah, okay, I'm going to put that in the you really should have one of these category. This is just an electric infrared thermometer. This is what I use to check the temperature on my tanks. I used to have a thermometer in each tank, but I found it inconvenient. they'd get all slimy, they'd moss up, they'd float away, they'd break or sink or whatever. So in the end, I just point it at the side of the tank, and there we go. That's the temperature in my tank. One thing I will say about these, there seem to be a lot of people that kind of don't understand infrared thermometers. Like this one comes with a laser pointer on it, and they say, oh, you can point it in the tank and you can see what the temperature of the heater is. No, you don't. The infrared beam reads the temperature of the first thing it touches, and that's the surface of the glass. So just because the laser's piercing through the glass doesn't mean the infrared beam is. So keep that in mind. You're not, if you're doing it using this in the kitchen, and by the way, that's what this is. This is just a kitchen thermometer. If you're using it in the kitchen, yeah, you use it to check the temperature of that specific piece of meat in a pan. But for an aquarium, it immediately terminates on the surface of the glass. So just keep that in mind. Well, assuming I haven't forgotten anything else, this is just my little follow-up of hardware that I think you should have. Hope it was helpful. I'll talk to you later. Bye.